Jack Wallace stood in the doorway of Director Marcus Lindholm's corner office, the autumn sunlight slanting across the polished walnut floor. His heart thudded against the ribs he'd strained for so many decades, but his face remained impassive. Seated behind the desk, with her tablet balanced on her knee, was Lydia Hartwell from Human Resources. Lydia, whose polite detachment made her eyes look almost glazed. Marcus's voice, cold and unhurried, cut through the silence like a blade. "Jack, after 17 years, we're eliminating your position." 15 seconds earlier, Jack might have been thinking about the morning's code review or the cafeteria's new blueberry muffins. Now, with those few words hanging in the stale conference room air, everything he'd built at Ridgegate Technologies in Willowbrook, Vermont, felt suddenly fragile. Jack Wallace. No, Wallace, he reminded himself, his skin trickling as he straightened in his jacket. Jack Wallace, 54 years old, senior systems analyst. Until this Monday morning, the backbone of the IT department, the unspoken guardian of every legacy system and clandestine backdoor, silently steering the company from dial-up days into the cloud age. He'd watched 3 CEOs come and go, each with a glossy PowerPoint about synergy and disruptive innovation, while he quietly taught every new hire how to navigate the labyrinthine scripts and buried admin credentials that underpinned Ridgegate's network. He'd recovered lost files at midnight, patched security holes at dawn, refused both a promotion and a pat on the back, because loyalty was reward enough. So when Marcus summoned him, with Lydia's unreadable expression and the faint hum of the HVAC unit, Jack knew. He had known for weeks that whispers in the hallway, the hushed conference room meetings he wasn't invited to, the odd look on Marcus's face, it all pointed to this. "I understand completely," he said, in a neutral tone, nodding once. He let his shoulders go slack, melting the tension so no one could see the anger coiling inside. No tremor in his voice, no clenched jaw, nothing to betray the sting of betrayal. He turned and walked out without another word, the velvet carpet muffling his steps, leaving behind the clipboards, the plaques, and the faded schematic of Ridgegate's original server layout taped to the wall. Back at his desk, Jack paused, breathing in the antiseptic scent of the cubicle farm. Carpet cleaner, recycled air, the faint bitterness of leftover coffee. His colleagues glanced sideways, their faces a blend of sympathy and relief. Relief that it wasn't them. Many of those younger analysts were his own protégés. Bright-eyed graduates who thought they knew everything about modern systems, but who'd never seen the custom diagnostic tools he'd coded in the basement, the encrypted logs he set to record every attempt at unauthorized access. He began packing methodically. First came the framed photograph of his daughter Ashley in her cap and gown, the same ceremony he'd watched from his office window year after year. Beneath it, a chipped ceramic mug painted by his son Lucas in middle school, the glaze warped at the handle from Jameson's spills and dishwasher mishaps. Next, the hardy little succulent in a cobalt pot, the one that had survived fluorescent lights and accidental overwatering for nearly 2 decades. Evelyn Connors from marketing approached, her steps hesitant. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her lips trembled as she whispered, "Jack, I just heard. This can't be right. You basically built this place." He shrugged, tucking the turquoise pot into a box lined with packing paper. "Companies evolve," he said softly, eyes on his desk drawer. "They don't always remember who held the map." His words drifted away before they could spark an argument. He was tired of fighting ghosts. At the elevator bank, Marcus reappeared, arms folded, watching him as though Jack were a specimen under glass. No handshake, no farewell, only the cool scrutiny of a man making sure the job was done. Jack pressed the lobby button, the elevator's mechanical dings echoing like a countdown. When the doors closed, he exhaled, steeling himself for the next act. What none of them realized was that Jack had spent years documenting every server update, every emergency access, every deprecated line of code. He'd set up secure audit protocols at the request of the legal team after a minor scandal 2 years ago, protocols no one else even remembered. He had complete off-site backups. In the company parking lot, Jack sat for a long moment behind the wheel of his 2012 sedan, staring back at the 12-story tower where he'd devoted so many hours of his adult life. The security badge he'd just surrendered had borne his name 16 times over. He turned the key in the ignition, the engine's hum a fragile lifeline, carrying him away from obscurity toward opportunity or revenge. Ridgegate had started as a two-floor startup when his daughter Ashley was still in preschool. Now it was a public company with 4 acquisitions in its wake. Jack had turned down offers from rival firms, Luminary Solutions, Polaris Tech, because loyalty meant something. His wife Laura often joked that the server room was his second home. She wasn't entirely wrong. For 17 years, he'd navigated digital minefields the executives never saw, the custom scripts to bypass firewall quirks, the old DOS-based archival system still humming beneath layers of modern frameworks. Marcus had taken over as director 5 years ago, fresh out of an MBA program, all talk of agile transformation and lean scaling. "We need to future-proof," he'd say in meetings, while Jack choked on his coffee, recalling that future-proof was corporate code for cut jobs. 6 months ago, Jack noticed he was missing from internal update threads. Then came the consultant. Henry Carlisle, expensive suit, Silicon Valley pedigree, hired to streamline operations. Jack watched them huddle behind frosted glass doors, eyes flicking toward him. 3 months ago, his admission permissions subtly eroded. Small changes. Easy to overlook if you weren't looking. At home that evening, Laura asked, "Everything okay at Ridgegate?" Jack tapped the rim of his mug, avoiding her gaze. "Just some restructuring," he said, voice flat. But this restructuring had his name written all over it. One afternoon, running a routine security audit he'd set to trigger in the early hours, Jack discovered irregularities in the financial logs. Automated transfers to a shell vendor, Aurora Apex Group. The name meant nothing, but the account number traced back to a UPS mailbox downtown. Small amounts at first, 5,000, then 10, then 20. Over 18 months, nearly $2 million siphoned through legitimate invoices with a 15 to 20% markup. Enough to evade casual scrutiny, but colossal in aggregate. He dug deeper, cross-referencing board meeting minutes with payment schedules. The money trail led directly to CFO Brandon Fields, a second shell company registered to Thomas Fields. Brandon's brother-in-law surfaced in public records. Jack leaned back, a cold clarity settling in his chest. He wasn't angry, he was focused. The morning after his layoff, he sat in his home office, darkness outside the window, only the glow of his laptop illuminating stacks of notebooks. Laura placed a steaming cup of coffee beside him, her touch gentle but insistent. "Do you want to talk?" He shook his head. She stood by the door, waiting, then finally left to run errands. He opened the locked drawer and retrieved a flash drive, a device he'd kept for emergencies, complete with encrypted backups of every critical log he'd created. His hands moved with purpose as he prepared for the first true test of his career, exposing fraud on the highest level. He drafted an email to the board, laying out the financial discrepancies with clinical precision, but deleted it before sending. Too blunt, too easy for them to dismiss as the ranting of a disgruntled former employee. He needed leverage, timing. Wednesday was board meeting day. The quarterly financials would be unveiled, bonuses approved. Perfect. He closed his laptop and allowed himself a small, tight smile. At 9 o'clock IEM on Wednesday, Jack parked across the street from the Ridgegate lobby, dressed not in his usual worn blazer but in dark jeans and a leather jacket, intent on blending into the commuter crowd. In the passenger seat lay a laptop logged into a clandestine email account he'd set up under the guise of a penetration test. At exactly 9:15, he sent an email to Marcus with the subject line, "Urgent. Financial irregularities detected," including sanitized excerpts of invoices and payment trails, but omitting the familial connections. If Marcus were complicit, panic would set in. If he weren't, an investigation would commence. Either way, Jack would learn the truth. By 9:45, Marcus's number flashed on his phone. Jack let it ring out. The voicemail was terse. "Jack, we need to discuss your email immediately. Call me back." He didn't. Instead, he drove to a corner cafe, opened his laptop, and waited. At 10:30, a reply arrived from Lydia in HR. "Mr. Wallace, we've received communication from you that may violate the terms of your separation agreement. Cease all contact with Ridgegate employees immediately or face legal action." Their tactic was clear: isolate, intimidate, discredit. But Jack Wallace was no longer the invisible analyst in the cubicle maze. He was the one holding the keys to the kingdom. And, As Ridgegate's revolving doors continued to disgorge oblivious employees, Jack leaned back in his chair, savoring the calm before the storm. By midday, Jack sat in the driver's seat of his old sedan, the late November sun slanting through the windshield in pale bands. He realized he'd never signed a separation agreement, no binding clause to muzzle him or preclude him from speaking out. His pulse hammered in his temples as he navigated the winding back roads toward Heritage Bank. Inside, the vault's heavy door groaned behind him, and the smell of aged leather and polished brass enveloped him. He slid open his safe deposit box, fingers brushing against the cool metal of a second flash drive, the one he'd stashed years ago, with archival logs and security architectures too sensitive for the office network. Sitting at a narrow desk in the bank's private room, Jack plugged in the drive and watched the directory populate. Rows of protocol documents, spreadsheets, and time-stamped access records. He opened the oldest subfolder, labeled Core Audit, Q1 2022, and scrolled through a dated PDF. There it was in clear black text. A request from CFO Brandon Fields, time-stamped 18 months earlier, to expand his own privileges in the financial approval module, exactly when the inflated transfers to Aurora Apex Group had begun. Jack's breath caught. He remembered authorizing that access an offhand email, buried in a thread about routine expense workflows. Back home, Jack's phone glowed with 3 missed calls: Director Marcus Lindholm, Human Resources Lead Lydia Hartwell, and Consultant Henry Carlisle. He let the calls go to voicemail. Inside the front hall, the late afternoon light fell across Laura's knitting basket and their golden retriever's bed. An urgent message from Stephen, his junior analyst protege, blinked in his personal inbox. "Jake, they're saying you've gone off the rails with that fraud email." Stephen's tone was frantic. He mentioned an emergency meeting, whispered about stripped permissions. Jack tapped the screen. "Stand down. Just observe." At precisely 3 o'clock, the landline rang. An antiquated gesture in this age of cell phones. The caller ID glowed with an unfamiliar string of digits. He picked up, and a composed voice greeted him. "Mr. Wallace? This is Brandon Fields. I'd like to discuss your concerns." The calmness in Fields' tone grated against Jack's nerves. He pictured the CFO's polished office, the discreet family photos on his... "Is this about Aurora Apex?" Jack asked. A pause followed. "There's been a misunderstanding," Fields replied smoothly. "Let's meet tomorrow." Jack smiled, low and mirthless. "I'm booked," he said, his voice slow. "But I think the board will be very interested in the connections between Aurora Apex and your brother-in-law." He heard the sharp intake of breath. "Let's not rush to conclusions," Fields countered, voice brittle now. "We can—" "Goodbye," Jack said, and hung up. Within 10 minutes, Lydia's email arrived. The severance package had doubled, conditional on absolute confidentiality. The official language dripped with panic. "Your prompt signature is required to finalize these terms." Jack printed the document, folded it neatly, and slid it into an envelope. He thought of the black-tinted windows of the executive parking garage, where Fields and Lindholm would be scrambling to salvage reputations. That night, Jack sat in his study under the warm lamplight, sipping stale coffee and combing through years of archived logs. He unearthed a pattern predating Aurora. 3 years ago, initial transfers to a shell consultancy named Lakeview Business Solutions. Small consulting fees never exceeding $10,000, just enough to avoid audit red flags. Yet over time, those fees ballooned. He traced the public records. The registered agent for Lakeview was Elaine Fields, Brandon's wife. The realization settled over him like frost. His pulse steadied as he revisited old email archives. There, in threads painstakingly preserved, he saw Marcus's hand guiding budget reallocations to Carlisle's firm. The consultant's invoices, approved without review, bore the hallmark of inside facilitation. Jack closed his eyes, picturing late-night meetings in the glass conference room. Hushed voices behind frosted panels. Betrayal had many forms. This one wore the facade of corporate strategy. By dawn, Jack had compiled every shred of evidence into a single, comprehensive dossier. Spreadsheets charting incremental cost increases, registration documents linking shell entities to the Fields family, and email chains implicating Lindholm and Carlisle. He crafted a narrative, crisp, unemotional, impossible to dismiss as the rantings of a scorned employee. Next, he reached out to Robert Chen, a board member he'd supported on a cybersecurity overhaul 2 years prior. Jack dialed his number from a burner phone. "Robert, it's Jake Wallace. I need 15 minutes. In a low voice, Chen replied, "I'm in town today. Meet me at Glenwood Park in 30. Jack hung up and drove to the leafy green expanse where early morning joggers trotted past. He found Robert on a wrought iron bench reading a newspaper. Jack handed him a sealed manila envelope. "Everything you need," he said. Robert studied the package, then met Jack's gaze. "You've outdone yourself," he whispered, and slipped the envelope into his coat pocket. Back in the car, Jack's phone buzzed. A text from Laura. "Is everything okay?" He typed, "They're panicking. Jason Phillips came to the house looking for me." She replied, "Stay safe." He felt the familiar ache of gratitude and the unsettling thrill of control. By midday, unsolicited job offers filled his mailbox. Nova Course Systems and Polaris Tech both dangled six-figure signing bonuses for senior security roles. He read them, then set them aside. This wasn't about a paycheck. It was about this moment of reckoning. That evening, Jack accessed Ridgegate's email server one last time. The transition team had overlooked revoking his legacy credentials, proof of their arrogance. With methodical precision, he scheduled a flood of messages to the entire board, set to dispatch at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Subject lines like, "Urgent, review of financial discrepancies," would carry his dossier directly to every director's inbox. He crafted a brief cover note, "For your eyes only, detailed findings attached." He went to bed before midnight, the quiet of the house broken only by the hum of the laptop's standby light. At 7:30, he was on his porch with a mug of coffee, watching morning's first pale rays gild the horizon. At exactly 8 o'clock, his email blast went live. He felt his phone immediately light up. Unknown numbers, board assistants, scrambling. He ignored them all. By 9 o'clock, the Emergency Finance Committee meeting convened. Jack pictured Robert standing beside the committee chair, delivering the evidence with calm authority. Jack leaned back, letting the unfolding chaos wash over him. At 9:32, his phone vibrated. A text from Stephen. "Police here. Fields and Lindholm in questioning. Phillips looks shell-shocked." Jack didn't respond. Everything was unfolding as he'd foreseen. Shortly after, his cell rang, displaying an unlisted number. He answered, recognizing the firm cadence of General Counsel Patricia Graves. "Mr. Wallace, we appreciate your cooperation," she began, voice measured. "The board would like you to come in." Jack exhaled slowly. "I've provided all documentation," he replied evenly. "If anything untoward happens to me or my family, copies have already been filed with the SEC, IRS, and 3 major news outlets." Silence stretched. "Understood," Graves whispered at last. "We look forward to your continued cooperation." He hung up, then drove 20 miles west to the Oak Hollow Diner, a roadside refuge he used during long investigations. Over a chipped porcelain mug of decaf, he skimmed the local business news app. Ridgegate Technologies execs under federal investigation. No names yet, but the lead paragraphs painted a vivid picture. At 2 o'clock, his phone buzzed. "Robert, it's a bloodbath. Fields confessed under scrutiny. Lindholm's lines went dead. Carlyle's claiming ignorance." Jack allowed himself a brief, satisfied smile. Early estimates, more than $4,500,000, 0 cents diverted over 3 years. He'd been cautious, documenting every cent, and come within a few $1,000s of the final tally. Later that afternoon, another call from Robert. "The board wants you back. They're creating a chief security officer role, reporting directly to them." Jack paused, the weight of the offer settling around him. He could reclaim his career or walk away untouched. That night, he finally told Lara everything. She listened by the fireside, embers glowing softly. When he finished, she took his hand. "What do you want?" she asked simply. He thought of the relentless months of preparation, the hours spent buried in logs and contracts. He imagined the hollow victory of a consolation prize. "I want to protect people," he said at last, "and to build something that lasts." In the silence that followed, both understood the game had changed. The people who discarded him were themselves reeling under the weight of their deceit. Justice had arrived, delivered not in fury, but in unerring precision. Jack Wallace paused on his front step, the October dusk settling like warm honey around him. His fingers hovered over his pocket as he pulled out his phone and reread the headline he'd posted to LinkedIn only an hour before. Never burn bridges. Just let them collapse under the weight of their own greed. He set the phone on the stone ledge beside the door and inhaled the cool evening air. Behind him, the porch light cast long shadows across the planks, and the world felt suspended, waiting, watching. The simple message had stirred something unexpected in the quiet corners of his professional network. Within minutes, friend requests and congratulatory notes had started to trickle in. Former colleagues marveling at the guy who did the unthinkable, industry peers sharing their respect, and even board members reaching out through back channels. The quiet systems analyst had become, overnight, the architect of his own vindication. Monday morning, Bridgegate Technologies headquarters, Willowbrook. Jack stepped out of his car in the visitor's parking lot, straightening the charcoal gray suit he hadn't needed in years. The morning air was crisp, carrying a hint of wood smoke from distant chimneys. As he approached the glass and steel lobby of Ridgegate's 12-story headquarters, a uniformed guard recognized him at once. "Mr. Wallace?" the guard called, eyes widening. "Your badge, sir?" Jack offered his visitor's pass, purchased at the reception desk moments earlier, and the guard scanned it with a brisk nod. "Welcome back," he said, handing Jack a fresh badge clipped to his lapel. "Floor 12. In the mirrored elevator, Jack caught sight of himself. The same pragmatic jawline, flecks of gray at the temples, eyes set in a calm expression that betrayed nothing of the whirlwind he'd unleashed. When the doors opened on the executive floor, the plush carpeting muted his steps, and only a single secretary glanced up before returning to her emails. He walked the short corridor to the boardroom door, where a discreet nameplate read Board of Directors. Jack paused, hand on the polished metal handle, and took a breath. This was the culmination, the moment when those who'd cast him aside would have to look him in the eye. Inside, 10 board members sat around an oval mahogany table. The late morning light slanted through vertical blinds, striping the carpet in bright lines. At the head of the table stood interim CEO Diana Palmer, formerly COO, appointed only weeks ago. Beside her sat Finance Committee Chair Robert Chen, flanked by other directors, the General Counsel, outside auditors, and 2 independent members. All watched Jack's entrance in silence. Robert offered a slight nod as Jack set a leather-bound folder on the table's center. "Good morning, Mr. Wallace," Diana began, her voice steady but cautious. "Thank you for returning on such short notice." Jack inclined his head, folding his hands behind his back. "Thank you for inviting me." He paused, letting the weight of their silence stretch. He saw the flicker of realization in Diana's eyes, the subtle shift in posture among the directors, a recognition that events had outpaced even their contingency plans. Diana cleared her throat. "The report you circulated, and the subsequent forensic findings, reveal a level of misappropriation we had not anticipated. As of this morning, our finance team has identified $5,200,000, 0 cents, in funds diverted through shell companies over a 3-year period. Criminal referrals are being prepared." Jack remained impassive, though inside he felt a low hum of satisfaction. He recalled the late nights poring over audit logs, the sense of cold clarity that had settled in his chest when he first connected every dot. Robert leaned forward. "Jake, if I may?" "Jack, the board has unanimously approved the creation of a new executive role, Chief Information Security Officer. The position will carry full audit and security authority across all departments, an independent budget line, and direct reporting to this board." Jack placed his fingers atop the folder. "Inside, you'll find the terms and conditions I require," he said, voice even. "Non-negotiable." Diana exchanged a quick glance with Robert before opening the folder. Her eyebrows rose as she scanned the bulleted list. Full audit authority, unrestricted access to all digital and financial systems on demand. Independent budget, authority to allocate resources without departmental approval. Veto power, final say on any financial technology expenditures or third-party engagements. Board reporting, quarterly presentations directly to the board, with written summaries circulated company-wide. She looked up, eyes meeting Jack's. "This is unusual," she said softly. He met her gaze. "So was embezzling over $5 million?" he replied. "It happened because no one was watching. Now, someone will be." A breathless silence filled the room. Then Robert cleared his throat and reached across the table. "We have until noon to finalize this," he said. "Your other offers notwithstanding, we hope you'll accept." Jack folded his arms. "I have until noon." He turned toward the door. At that moment, Diana spoke again. "Jack, did you plan all of this from the start?" He paused in the frame, light catching the silver in his hair. "I didn't plan to be fired after 17 years, he said quietly. "Everything after that was just me doing what I've always done, identifying vulnerabilities, then implementing defenses." And with that, he left the room. 6 months later, corner office, Ridgegate Technologies. Jack sat in the wide leather chair behind a glass-topped desk, reviewing the upcoming quarter's security roadmap. The downtown Willowbrook skyline stretched beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, steepled church spires, the green-domed courthouse, and far-off rolling hills gilded by autumn color. A framed photograph of Laura and their golden retriever, Harper, stood to his left. On his right, a gilded plaque read, "Chief Information Security Officer." He sipped a mug of strong black coffee and reflected on the transformation. Brandon Fields had pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud for orchestrating the Aurora and Lakeview schemes. He faced a significant prison sentence offset by his cooperation. Marcus Lindholm's silence and culpability had led to his immediate resignation and referral for civil proceedings. Henry Carlisle had attempted to evade extradition, but was being flown back to testify. Ridgegate had recovered nearly all the misappropriated funds, and outside auditors praised the swift board action. Jack glanced down at his phone, where a text from Stephen, the junior analyst he'd promoted to senior security architect, read, "Budget increase approved, team is ready to roll." He tapped a reply. "Let's make this the best quarter yet." A knock at the door drew his attention. Laura stepped in, her auburn hair catching the afternoon sun. "Lunch?" she asked, holding 2 orders of sandwiches from their favorite deli. He stood and pocketed his phone. "Absolutely." They walked together through the newly rebranded Security Operations Center, rows of analysts pausing in their work to offer nods of respect. Not fear, respect. People understood now that Jack could have brought the company to its knees. Instead, he'd saved it. He opened the door to the executive elevator, and as the doors slid shut, Laura squeezed his hand. "Are you happy?" she asked quietly. He considered her question. The anger that had fueled him in the early days was gone, replaced by something warmer. The knowledge that he could right system weaknesses and build trust. "Not exactly happy," he admitted, "but satisfied. Sometimes that's better." She smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Then let's go eat." That evening, as the office lights glimmered like fireflies below, Jack stood on his apartment balcony, phone in hand. A final message from Robert Chen illuminated the screen. "The board has unanimously approved your security budget increase. No objections, no revisions, just trust." Jack hovered his thumb over the text field, then typed, "Thank you, let's build stronger bridges this time." He set the phone down and watched the city glow, confident that this time, the structures they erected would stand firm against the weight of any greed or betrayal.